Hi, I am Jessica Ridgely Dio. Today we are going to talk about bone density, bone strength, bad to the bone. And to give you a little background about myself, I am board certified in integrative medicine. I am also board certified in internal medicine and osteopathic manipulation. I work at HCIL Health One Sky Ridge Primary Care in Lone Tree. And I do have my email address below if anybody has any questions after this presentation. So let's move forward talking about how to become bad to the bone. See here. Hold on. There we go. And for stronger bones. Today, what we're going to talk about initially is we're going to discuss a little bit of bone physiology so people understand kind of what we're talking about as we talk about certain things. We're going to talk about osteoporosis. What is osteoporosis and what can cause it? We were going to talk about different nutrients that are absolutely necessary in the diet and optimal amounts of those nutrients to make sure that we're building our bones. We're going to talk about foods that can help, the role of protein in the diet and how that plays into bone strength. We're also going to talk about the types of exercises that help and working towards having stronger bones. If you have questions, please put them in the chat and we will try to answer them at the end. All right, so this is a picture of bone. I thought it was really pretty. And in the outside of the bone, you have the compact bone, and then you have the trabecular bone on the inside, and that's also where you have more of the marrow area that develops all the red and white blood cells and that kind of thing. When it comes to bone strength, there's 4 cells that are super important in regards to bone density. The first one is the osteocyte. That is the bone cell. It's the formed cell, the mature cell that's keeping the bone intact and making sure that it remains strong. The next one is the osteoprogenitor cell. The osteoprogenitor cell regulates the mineral ions going in and out of the bone, which is really important when we're talking about bone loss. So those play a very big role in making sure that minerals hopefully go into the bone and not out of the bone. The next two are things that kind of build and break down bone. The one that you want to stimulate is the osteoblast. The osteoblast is on the surface of the bone, and it kind of knits things together and puts things and makes the bone cells stronger, and it actually helps to build bone. And these is stimulated when we're younger by growth hormone, and then as we get older by calcitonin, which is another hormone that we have, and mechanical stress, making sure that we're actually doing activities and that kind of nature, which I know many of us know that activity is important to bone strength. And then the one that we try to kind of quiet down when we're having bone loss is osteoclasts. So osteoclasts, they kind of just disrupt the bones. So it's important. They do a lot of important things. So you want to break down the bad bone and you want to build up the good bone. And so there's this constant bone remodeling. And when we have osteoporosis, the problem is that there's more breakdown than there is building up. And that's the problem. So that's what we're going to talk about today and ways to kind of stop that process from happening. So let's talk a little bit about osteoporosis and what it is. But before we do that, this is a funny little graphic on what it kind of seems like osteoclasts are doing in osteoporosis. So usually they're working together and then it gets a little out of sync when things start to break down. Osteoporosis. So before we get into the specific types, I would like to give you the description that I give many of my patients when I'm talking about osteoporosis. And I say that the bones are a storehouse. They store so many different nutrients, not just minerals, also vitamins. And when the other tissues of the body need them, then it takes from the bones. And then the blood takes from the tissues. And blood reigns supreme. It will always stay at a good level as long as there is some capacity to do so. And it's important to understand that because I have a lot of patients who will ask me to do blood tests to check for certain minerals, and the reality is that if you're showing decreased mineral content in the blood, then the tissues and the bones have been having issues for a while, a long while. So when we talk about building the bones back, it's important to look at it as a storehouse, and the fact that not only do you have to get the nutrients that you would normally need, but actually get some of the nutrients above and beyond what you need to put that back into those stores. So the types of osteoporosis are type 1 is postmenopause. And I think many women are familiar with this. This is the estrogen deficiency one. So when that happens, the decreased estrogen deficiency or decrease in estrogen causes an increase in osteoclast activity. And this starts to cause bone resorption, or that breakdown of the bone, to be more common than the bone formation. And so then we start to get less and less formation, and then they become fragile. They become more fragile, and we become more likely to have a bone density issue and a potential fracture. There is a genetic predisposition that does play a role in that. There's also something called the type 2, and the type 2 is age-related. So this can happen regardless of whether you're male or female. And it really comes down to decreased amount of nutrients, which causes decreased bone formation, and it causes it to have decreased bone mass. And this one actually causes things to become more brittle, and not so much as fragile as the postmenopausal does. A couple other things that can cause osteoporosis that are kind of outside of the body that we put in our bodies. One is steroids. Steroids, especially for people who have had to do many rounds of steroids, can definitively cause significant issues, and cortisol does play a role in that because the higher glucocorticoids do cause increased bone resorption. Then you also have the proton pump inhibitors. Those are things that you use for acid reflux. Those are like your omeprazole, your pantoprazole, Nexium. There's a lot of them. But those are proton pump inhibitors. And what they do is they actually decrease the amount of minerals that can be absorbed. And because it decreases the absorption, then it also decreases your ability to have the appropriate amount. And then you go back to this, AKA age-related. Another one is hormone reducers, like aromatase inhibitors. Those are usually used post breast cancer. And those actually do decrease hormones, specifically estrogens, to prevent further breast cancer in the future. And those do have a propensity to cause that bone loss, like the type 1, the postmenopausal, where you have estrogen deficiencies. Some honorable mentions of diseases that can cause these types of issues with the bones is an overactive thyroid. Overactive thyroid causes your metabolism to go very high, and in that it does cause some stress, and you do put out more cortisol, and in that it will cause more bone loss. Another one is the parathyroid gland overactivity. Parathyroid is directly related to the activity of the osteoclasts, those ones that will break things down. So if you have too much parathyroid hormone, then that will cause more osteoclast activity, and it will cause a decrease. Also, persistently increased cortisol. There's not really been any specific connection between high stress and bone loss. But when you consider that stressful environments and a very persistently high stressful environment can cause elevated cortisol from the adrenal glands, that can also add to the picture. Autoimmune diseases can definitely add to this picture as well. One, because it causes a lot of stress in the body, but also many times we're using medications like prednisone, which is a steroid that will cause bone loss. We also have gastrointestinal malabsorption. That's anything that's not allowing the body to absorb the nutrients that we need, and including the minerals and the vitamins that are necessary. And so because we can't absorb it, just like the PPIs, If we can't absorb it, then we can't put it back in the storehouse, so that creates a problem. Another one is genetic or low protein intake can cause increase in urine calcium. So that is not the most clear. So now that I've read it, so there is a genetic predisposition to having an increased output of urinary calcium. So I do actually, when I check my patients for osteoporosis, I do check to see if they're putting out too much calcium in their urine, because there are certain medications that can help decrease that. However, another thing that can cause urinary calcium is low protein intake. And protein plays a bigger role in the importance of our bone density than even I was actually aware. When I was researching this subject came up for me, and I did a little bit more of a deeper dive, and it was really interesting because I have never been told or read something that stated that protein was such a big deal when it comes to bone density. So, but it is a big deal, and we will talk about how much protein we need to take in, because 1 in 2 postmenopausal women do not get enough protein. So these are the different disease processes that can also cause it, and we need to be more aware of these issues causing that, because we may need to screen sooner for people who do have these issues. All right, moving forward, some of our lifestyle factors that can play a role. One is just overall decreased mineral intake. We're not getting enough of these minerals, so then our body can't utilize them appropriately. Eating disorders, for the same reason, that if we have decreased mineral intake, if we're not eating the appropriate things, we're going to have decreased mineral intake and vitamin intake. Bariatric surgery, although very helpful from a lot of different ways, can predispose somebody to having decreased vitamin and mineral intake. And it is something that they watch post-bariatric surgery and give a lot of good vitamins for, to try to prevent certain issues such as this, but it can cause that. A few others is increased alcohol, increased tobacco, decreased protein intake, which we did discuss, and a sedentary lifestyle, and that has to do with the mechanical stress on the bones. All right, so this is a big slide, and I am going to invite anybody who is watching this to take a picture of it if they would like. It is all of the big minerals. There's about 11 really big minerals and vitamins that play a role in our bones, and it's super important to get enough of them. And I put up the optimal amounts that you need to get. Now, when I say optimal, I'm saying that this is the amount that is needed for the bones, or for the body in general to have. If we have bone thinning, we want to actually have a little bit more so that we can put some things away. The most important thing to know about this is that you should be getting a lot of this through your diet. And so it's not as though you have to find a supplement that has these amounts. If you're eating a good diet, which we will talk about, then in reality, you should be fine getting about half the amount that you see here to get the optimal amount that you need. So let's talk about these. We have calcium. The optimal amounts of calcium in the diet is 1,000 to 1,200 milligrams. I would definitely, if you're having bone thinning, go for that higher number. Calcium helps with muscle contraction and bone development. Magnesium, you want about 400 to 500 milligrams per day. There's over 300 uses of magnesium in the body. And I've talked about magnesium a lot. It's definitely one of my top 5 in the supplements for so many different things. It helps with sleep. It helps with muscle relaxation. So it counteracts calcium and that muscle contraction. And it does help with bone density. It helps with glucose metabolism, all sorts of things. So magnesium is very, very important. We also have vitamin D. I did not give an amount that you need to have. In a lab, the vitamin D will say that you only need to have a level of 30, which is not true. That somehow got changed about 5 to 10 years ago. And the reality is you need to have that at least above 40 and the optimal level on lab is 50 to 80. And this helps with bone mineral regulation and all organ health. It also decreases cancer potential, and having a range of 50 to 80 can help decrease cognitive decline as well. So vitamin D is a very, very important vitamin. It works in conjunction with vitamin K, which you need about 50 to 150 micrograms per day. And it's specifically vitamin K2. I should say that. It's vitamin K2 that works well with vitamin D. And that is actually found most in your grass-fed and pasture-raised meats more than anything, or you can supplement it. It helps with bone health, blood clotting, and it decreases cancer risk. Silicon, which is something that we think of in our computer more than we think of in our body, is 20 to 40 milligrams per day, and it helps with all connective tissue. It helps with the bones, skin, hair, nails, all of it. So very important, and there's a lot of studies that have shown that if you are low in silicon, that it does affect your bone health, and that actually getting appropriate amounts helps to increase density. Copper is 1.1 milligrams. This helps to form elastin, which is another type of bone tissue that helps kind of form and hold things together. It's also important in energy and immune system, your energy metabolism and your immune system. Zinc, we need about 9.6 milligrams per day. I am going to tell people in this one that you do not want more than 50 milligrams of zinc in a day, as it will cause you to lose other minerals through your urine. And that's including copper and calcium, magnesium, and iron. And that's really important to understand, because I have seen people since COVID actually start to take higher levels of zinc on a daily basis. I do not recommend taking more than 15 to 25 milligrams as a supplement, because most people get about 20 to 25 milligrams in food at minimum. Another important one, and that actually manages cell growth and development, which bone is part of that cell growth, immune system, and wound healing. Manganese is another important one. That is 2.8 milligrams. Helps you build bone, connective tissue, and helps with blood clotting. Vitamin C, the appropriate amount optimally is 50 to 100 milligrams daily. This helps with tissue growth, development and repair, and iron absorption. One of the ones that kind of surprised me was boron, because I hadn't heard of that one before, but that one is definitely important, and it's 1 to 3 milligrams per day, and it regulates the use of other vitamins. So it does help to kind of put those different minerals where they need to go. Selenium is 66 micrograms per day. That's important for thyroid health, immune system, and antioxidant production. And it actually helps to decrease the inflammation that can potentially cause problems with bone health, but it also does play a role in bone density. So these are all the vitamins and minerals that our bones love, and we need to make sure that we're getting enough of these. All right, let's talk about protein. So protein stimulates bone formation. It enhances calcium absorption. It reduces loss of calcium in the urine. And the amount of protein that we need is typically low in 1 of 3 individuals and in 1 of 2 postmenopausal women. So protein is definitely something that is getting a lot more play lately, but I still feel like we need to give more and more information, because I find that a lot of the people that I talk to about protein, they're surprised when I talk about how important it is. So the basic amount of protein that you need to get is 1 gram per kilogram of ideal body weight. So we're not going by pounds here, we're going by kilograms. And you can say about half of the poundage is around kilograms. It's actually dividing it by 2.2. So if somebody weighs 150 pounds, then they typically need around 70 kilograms or their body weight is 70 kilograms, and therefore they need around 70 grams of protein per day. Now, that is the basic amount that you need. So that is not the amount that is going to manage breakdown of muscle tissue, helping to reestablish bone tissue. So, and if you have osteoporosis, we need to be more active. So you would actually need around 1.25 to 1.5 grams per kilogram ideal body weight. My recommendation is if you have osteopenia, to focus more about that 1.25 grams per kilogram. And if you have osteoporosis, to focus more on that 1.5 gram per kilogram. And in the studies that have been done, bone density is inversely related to protein intake over a lifetime. So very important to understand that. It is very important with our bone density. And for example, a 1.25 to 1.5 grams is typically, for most women, is around 80 to 100 grams per day. So that's just like kind of an understanding of where we would be with that. For example, if you are at 1.5 and you are 70 kilograms, then you're looking at needing around 105 grams of protein per day to kind of get that at a higher level. It is important to also know that you can get too much protein, and too much protein can actually cause some mineral absorption issues as well. I would get that number around 120 grams a day, and that's for most people, even men. There's certain men that at that 1.5, they would be higher than that. And if their ideal body weight actually does call for that, then that's what I would recommend. But in women, they did find that anything over about 110 grams of protein per day can have kind of an alternate effect to that. So this is my pretty little picture. I've used this picture multiple times. I like this picture because I think it shows a lot of what we're looking at for needing. There's a few things in there that are honorable mentions that I haven't gotten to yet for things that are really good. But we need protein, which is where that fish is, and we need some good, healthy omega-3s and different things like that. But the most important thing about this picture is we need an anti-inflammatory diet. Most body processes cannot manage in an inflammatory environment, and using food to decrease inflammation can be incredibly helpful. So when we're looking at an anti-inflammatory diet, we're looking at fish or adding omega-3s, lots of plants, lots of fruits and vegetables. The amount of fruits and vegetables that you need in a day is between 7 to 9 servings. And a serving of, let's say, take a fruit. So a serving of fruit might be that one apple. It can also be a half a cup of berries. Vegetables, usually if it's cooked, it's about a half a cup, but if it's not cooked, like that broccoli that's raw, it would be about 1 cup. Same thing for the carrot, like 1 cup of carrot slices. Or if you cook the carrots, it usually goes down to about a half a cup. Peas are about a half a cup as well. So you can basically say that it's either 1 piece of fruit or it's between a half a cup to 1 cup is a serving size. For lettuce, I say to grab some lettuce with your hand, and what you hold in your hand is that 1 serving of lettuce. It's a pretty good guesstimation for that. One of the things that I think is super important to understand, and one of the things that we're going to talk about, is phytoestrogens. And phytoestrogens in this picture, you're looking more at the tofu, the soy, the flax, sesame seeds, cruciferous vegetables, peaches, and berries. Those have higher phytoestrogens, and they do play a role in helping to maintain bone density. So these are our food honorable mentions. One is the omega-3s. Omega-3s reduce bone resorption, and they decrease inflammation that causes bone turnover and increases the bone turnover markers. So omega-3s are super important in, kind of like vitamin D, in every cell of the body. You want around 1,200 milligrams of EPA to DHA daily, and you want around 600 milligrams of ALA. ALA is the ones that you'll find more in your fruits and vegetables. EPA and DHA are the things that you'll find in your fish, especially fatty fish like halibut and salmon. You'll find it in grass-fed beef, but you will not find it in grain-fed beef. You'll find it in pasture-raised chicken, eggs from pasture-raised chicken, and wild meats. If the animal eats what they're supposed to eat, they typically will produce omega-3s in their meat or in their muscle. When we talk about that, it is important to know kind of ratios. Like you could eat 2 4-ounce portions of salmon in a week and get the amount of EPA and DHA you need for the entire week. Whereas if you were to eat 4 ounces of grass-fed beef, you're getting 600 milligrams of omega-3s. So you're definitely getting omega-3s with the grass-fed beef, but you're not getting as much as you would if you had 4 ounces of halibut or salmon. The next one that is really interesting that I talked about and what they were is the phytoestrogens. And phytoestrogens also decrease bone resorption, and they promote healthy bone formation. This has to do with the phytoestrogens. It's also important to understand that there's been no link in phytoestrogens with cancer, and they help to reduce inflammation quite a bit. So phytoestrogens can be super helpful from a lot of different perspectives, but regarding bone density, I recommend higher amounts of phytoestrogens. That's also, we talked about the tofu and soy. I do not recommend soy milk because the proteins in soy milk have been heated to a point that it causes denaturing of the proteins, and denaturing of proteins causes increased inflammation and not decreased inflammation. So when we're talking about soy, edamame, a healthy tofu, something like that, that's great. But like I also mentioned, the flax, sesame, the cruciferous vegetables like your broccoli and your cauliflower, your peaches and your berries. Prunes was one of the ones that kind of surprised me. I found this study actually a couple studies that showed that eating 5 to 6 prunes per day would increase vitamin K, potassium, and magnesium, has been found to decrease oxidation, inflammation, and improve bone marrow density. So to put that in perspective, if you were to eat 6 prunes a day, you've had 3 servings of your fruits and vegetables. So prunes can be very helpful, and they can definitely be helpful with the bowel movements too. So there's lots of benefits to prunes, but that was one that I thought was really interesting and had a really good study on the fact that they did help to improve bone marrow density. We also have our nut butters and our nut milks, and nuts have a lot of protein in them. So that can be very helpful. Interestingly, about a half a cup of nuts gives you about 10 grams of protein. It also increases calcium, magnesium, vitamin E, and phosphorus. It also increases protein as well. So nut milks and nut butters are good ones to try. Instead of the soy milk, try the nut milks. So now we've talked about the foods that are all good and things that we want to have. Let's talk about the ones that we might want to limit a little bit, especially if we're having problems with our bone density. So foods to limit, the legumes. So legumes are your beans and your lentils, that kind of thing. They have phytates in them, and phytates can actually cause a decrease in calcium absorption. So it's very important to know. It's interesting because in small amounts, they seem to be helpful, but in larger amounts, they seem to be harmful. So I'm not going to recommend not ever eating beans because there's so many good things in beans, and I do consider them part of the vegetable group. So I wouldn't completely stay away from beans, but it may be something that if you're eating them every day, you might want to cut back on them. Salty foods, and that is You want to eat less than 2,300 milligrams per day of salt, because if you have more than that, it will leach calcium from the bones. So high oxalate foods. This is something that binds with calcium and actually causes kidney stones. The most common kidney stone is a calcium oxalate stone. And so oxalate binds calcium. And once again, like the legumes, I don't recommend staying off of them completely. But I did put a few of them here, like the rhubards, beets, and the beans that have higher oxalate. You can actually look up high oxalate foods in Google, and it'll give you a pretty complete list of things that have higher oxalate. I would never recommend trying to completely eliminate oxalate. However, I do recommend decreasing it if you seem to have a higher oxalate diet. Wheat bran has phytates, so it goes back to the same thing I said about the legumes. Alcohol leaches minerals in general, so the more you drink, the less likely you're going to have what you need for your body. Caffeine interferes with calcium absorption, so the recommendation is no more than 3 cups per day of caffeine, and that's an 8-ounce cup. Soft drinks, and these are mostly the dark soft drinks, have a significant amount of phosphorus, and although you do need phosphorus, if you have too much phosphorus, it can displace calcium. And also, if you're drinking a soft drink that has phosphorus with your meal, then it could displace the calcium that you might be able to absorb. So these are the foods that I would limit. I would completely decrease some of them, but some of the other ones like the legumes and some of the high oxalate foods, you just kind of have to see where you are and kind of decide if that's something that may be affecting your bone loss. All right, exercise. Super, 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 super important when it comes to bone density. We cannot remain sedentary and build bone. The other thing that is somewhat of a myth is that walking builds bone. Walking will help you to stop from losing bone, but it will not stop you or help you. It will not help you to increase bone. So although I like walking, and if that's the activity that you like to do, there's a certain ways to get around it. Many of my patients that say they like walking, I will have them use a weight vest. And I do not recommend more than around 10 to 12 pounds of the weight vest. But what the weight vest can do is it can actually add more mechanical stress to the bones when you're walking. And it'll actually help you with the cardiovascular benefit too. If you're going to do a weight vest, it needs to be one that is front to back and equal. So it's sitting on your shoulders and coming down the torso and the core equally. And you want to add weight equally as well. So a lot of the things that you can put into it are 1 to 2 pound weights. And so you'd want to put one in the front and one in the back if you're going to use that. Tai Chi is very interesting because it actually helps to reduce falls and it increases bone marrow density in the spine. And it likely has to do with the way the body moves when you're doing Tai Chi. The number one thing that can help is strength and resistance. And in studies, they found that the best type of resistance exercises is actually squats and deadlifts. And that brings me to something else I tell a lot of my patients. You want to have movements that are 2 joint exercises, like a squat. So you're going to squat and you're going to bend at the knees and at the hips. If you deadlift, you're going to bend at the knees and the hips. If you are doing a push-up, you're going to bend at the elbows and the shoulders. And those types of things, even whether you do them on the wall or whether you do it on, kind of modify it and do it off of a chair or you go down to your knees, they all are going to have mechanical stress because the muscles pull on the bones and they create mechanical stress. So the more you have to extend the muscles, the more likely it's going to create mechanical stress and tell the bones, hey, I need a little bit more strength here. So that's how those actually help. Yoga will help to increase strength and improve balance and flexibility. And as you are kind of strengthening and elongating those muscles, they're pulling on the bones and creating that mechanical stress. Jogging and stair climbing are interesting because one, your gait's a little bit wider typically with jogging, but also it creates a vibrational stress that is like a mechanical stress through the body that can help to stimulate bone density. Banded exercises, kind of similar to the 2-joint exercises, can be very helpful. And then there is something that's been studied that is still a little, I would give it from an A to an F, I would give it C-rated scientific evidence, and that's whole body vibration. Whole body vibration, because vibration and mechanical stress does seem to help bone density, they've had these vibrational plates that you can stand on, and they just move around a little bit, and you have to maintain your balance. They have been found to definitively help balance. There is some studies that show that they can help with bone marrow density, but it is not super definitive or super significant in how much bone density they actually improve. But those are the types of things that you need to do. Swimming can also help. I did put swimming in there. Swimming, and it's for the same reason of the elongation of muscles that's happening, especially through the spine. Planks can help because you're actually tightening those muscles isometrically around the spine. So planks can be very helpful for spinal bone density. All right. Strontium. So this is my last informational slide. Strontium is super interesting, and I didn't put this with the vitamins and minerals that the bone loves because a lot of people don't really know about strontium. It's actually been studied pretty significantly in Europe, and they are good studies. It enhances osteoblastic activity and decreases osteoclastic activity. So it helps to build the bone instead of causing the bone to break down. The accumulation of bones has been found to reduce fracture risk, which is pretty awesome. In a European study, after 1 year, it was found to help increase bone marrow density by 0.2, which that actually brings me to something I'm going to talk about, and I don't have a slide for, but just something for people to understand. But 0.2 is pretty significant, even in a 2-year period of time. And the dose that was in the study was 227 milligrams daily. There are actual strontium supplements that have it specifically at that because of that study. So what just kind of came to my attention that I didn't really put something in here, and I probably should have, is we measure bone density through DEXA scans. And what that does is it's a very low X-ray that helps to show how dense something is. And when we're looking at that, it's important to understand the numbers. So a -1 is actually considered to be normal, which you'd think 0 would, but -1 and below -1 is considered to be normal. Anything above -1 up to -2.5 is considered to be osteopenia, or mild to moderate bone loss. And anything over -2.5 is found to be osteoporosis. So that is actually the levels when you're looking at your DEXA scan that you're looking at for normal osteopenia and osteoporosis. Typically, what I see, even when we're doing treatment with medications, I will see bone marrow density increase between 0.2 to 0.4 within a 2-year period. That's what I commonly see. So it does not rebuild super quickly. I find that people who are on medications, especially the bone building medications, do not see a significant change as they should as well if they are not taking extra minerals and vitamins that help to support the bones. So that's just kind of an overall take of what the DEXA scan is and what to look for if you do have that done. Dude, careful. At your age, that hip, hip, hooray can turn into a hip, hip, hip replacement. That is something that we're trying to avoid, and I hope that this discussion. This webinar has been helpful to give you some ideas of ways that you can help yourself with lifestyle changes to make sure that you don't end up with a fracture from bone loss. Thank you for joining me today, and I will now take any questions that people have.
Dr. Ridgely, we do have one question about because thorough in what you described today, but when should one start being evaluated for osteoporosis? You mentioned the DEXA scan. When do you start doing that?
That's a good question. Typically, insurance will start covering it around the age of 60, and they will cover it every 2 years. If a person has some of the other issues that we were talking about earlier on, such as the overactive thyroid, parathyroid overactivity, or autoimmune issues, that means that they've had to take more steroids, many times they will start discussing that around the age of 50. So you can actually get it done sooner if you're looking at underlying diseases or other issues that put people at higher risk.
And there's one other question that came through on about vitamin D, and how do you balance making sure that you have an adequate supply through the foods you eat, but balancing that against your risk of perhaps skin cancer?
That's a good question too. So I it takes around 1 hour being out in sunlight to get vitamin D to really absorb appropriately. I mean, sometimes they say 15 minutes, but that's only in really high sun. And most people want to use sunscreen during that time. So, and sunscreen will completely block the conversion of vitamin D. So I tell people up until about, especially in the summertime, up until about 10:30 in the morning, and then after 2:30 in the afternoon, it's relatively safe to spend about an hour outside getting some vitamin D. If you're going to be out more than an hour, even in those times, after that hour, I would recommend putting on sunscreen. But I do believe it to be very helpful to not be as stringent on not even stringent, like hyper utilization of the sunscreen during those times. And when it comes to so that's the best way to get it, and that's how we're supposed to get it, is through sunlight. So if we can do that, that's great. The other way we can get it is through supplementation or fortified foods. And either way, however it is that we have to get that, I recommend getting it and making sure that your levels are above 40 for sure, and optimal 50 to 80.
Well, thank you, Dr. Ridgely. Those were our two very important questions, and we are so excited that you continue to share this incredibly valuable information with our community.
Absolutely. I feel very good about that. Thank you. I thank everybody for being here, and I hope you all have a good night.